Hey, it's Carly with the Expat Focus podcast. So many workplaces had to make drastic changes over the past year, which affected how we do our jobs, and in some cases, if we even still have one. Whether you're already abroad or looking to move internationally for work, it's a daunting time to be searching for that next opportunity. How has the pandemic affected your industry? Are there fewer jobs around? Have employer expectations changed? And what does the remote working trend even mean for the traditional expat job posting? Will it exist in the future? My guest, Gillian Cramb, an HR consultant based in the south of France, is joining me in this episode to share her insights and give you some job application tips. Before we get started, a reminder though that Expat Focus is not just a podcast, but a website too. So whether you're looking for specific country guides, relocation, financial, or expat health information, head to expatfocus.com where we have loads of free resources to help you move abroad easily. Gillian, tell me a bit about yourself and your own expat and career journey.
Well, I'm originally from Scotland, and actually, I haven't lived in Scotland for the past 11 years. I'm currently based in the south of France, where I have my own HR consultancy business. But I've lived in France, in Spain, Czech Republic, the UAE. But I've also worked in places like India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and so many more different countries. Yes, I've had quite a journey, although before coming to France, I was in the Middle East for a good long time. So it's been a bit of a change of culture to come from the Middle East to back to Europe.
And what inspired you to get into HR consultancy? Have you always worked in HR?
No is the answer. I actually started my career as a language teacher more than 20 years ago. When I went to Dubai originally, I went there to set up a language school, which turned into a training department, which turned into something bigger and something bigger. It was quite a shock for me to start working in the corporate world, but found that I really loved what I was doing. I had to work just a little bit harder, and I knew that I had to do something different if I wanted to really make a mark. So I went back to university and I did my MBA. I did some work on people and organizational development and just absolutely fell in love with it. So I had gone from language teaching to training and development to recruitment and mobilization, which included all of the training of employees and whatnot. And for me, it's all about people.
And with such rich experiences in so many different countries, I can imagine you've got some really deep insights into how people and organizations operate and interact in so many different cultural contexts as well.
Yes, it's so interesting working somewhere like Dubai because you have such a huge range of nationalities and you have access to lots of different parts of businesses that you probably wouldn't have access to anywhere else in the world. So it kind of accelerates your career, 10 times faster than it might have been anywhere else in the world.
One of the reasons I went abroad was to accelerate, reinvent my career, be able to have that international experience box ticked on my CV. Do you find that's really the motivation for a lot of people in the Middle East?
Yeah, I think so. I think there are lots of different reasons, and I mean, it's very attractive to employers if you have that kind of cultural experience in your CV. For a lot of people, it has a lot to do with money, and being able to get a job that can, really fund, your children's education and all of the other things that you really want to do in life. I think that's one of the reasons why people go to the Middle East. But in terms of being an expat internationally, I think it's such a rich and rewarding experience, and it looks so good on your CV that you have taken the time to really understand all of the different cultures that you're working with?
Even myself as an Australian moving to the UK, which culturally you could argue is not that different, really, I found so many small differences in workplace culture and in the way I should behave, for example, compared to
Yeah.
how I would interact with colleagues and bosses in a workplace back in Australia.
There's that sense of a little bit more formality, perhaps, in the workplace in the UK still. I think that's one of the big changes that I can see coming in the future, in actual fact. Especially, younger people coming into the workforce nowadays have a very different perspective on how we should conduct business. That sense of formality and playing the game is I think is something that's going to eventually start to die out, and there's this huge conflict in some workplaces now between the two mindsets.
I'm actually really relieved to hear that from someone who's used to being pretty authentic and um, I'm not good at sucking up to people, Gillian. That's basically my problem.
I can understand.
I'm actually really curious. You mentioned how things are changing. And in the past 12 months, of course, we've had this unprecedented pandemic that has really thrown a lot of people's plans out the window. We've had expats, foreigners who have been on missions abroad, who have had to go back to their passport countries. We've had people that were meant to move for jobs suddenly not be able to do that. Of course, many companies are restructuring, downsizing, considering where they want to place employees where they may not have before. What trends are you seeing in expat job searches at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. And I have a huge number of friends myself who have had to repatriate unexpectedly, very quickly. And it's a huge shock to the system. And there's all of this movement at a time when we have furlough schemes in place, we have these redundancies happening left, right, and centre. The labour market is in absolute turmoil. Having said that, there are jobs out there, and there are some good jobs out there if you know where to look. But competition is tough. It's probably never been tougher. Obviously, I do a lot of work with career coaching, mentoring, and CV writing. And over the past year, I've done quite a lot of pro bono work in terms of CV writing. One of the biggest things I have probably noticed, however, is that there is a huge shift in people's mentality to what they expect from the workplace. So even although they may have been made redundant or they may be in a situation where they need to find work, they are a bit more picky about the kind of lifestyle that they want to have in the future. The ability to have a more flexible routine, being able to work from home potentially, maybe not always, but at least some of the time, and having an ability to work for a company that can really concentrate on having work life balance. That's definitely something that I'm seeing. And there have been more and more requests coming in to me for information on remote working. This has kind of been traditionally reserved for positions like, tech positions, creative, graphic design kind of things. But now people are asking more and more where they can find these remote working jobs. But I guess it comes as no surprise, really, that people are looking for much greater flexibility, but they want to take on new and exciting roles which really have no location boundaries, if that makes sense.
I have seen a really heartening trend on LinkedIn Jobs, for example, and other job boards of roles being described as in X location or remote, partial remote possible, remote
Yeah.
within this one country. That's really fantastic to see. And I think it opens the doors for more applicants to be able to apply. But I wonder what you think this means for the traditional expat job posting if more jobs can be done from more locations?
I'm a little bit of a skeptic when it comes to this kind of a thing. And although I believe that there are going to be more and more remote positions available, and I do believe that companies are coming around to the idea of flexible working terms, I don't believe that it's going to happen particularly quickly. I also have the feeling that as much as companies want to do it, I think that as soon as the pandemic starts to kind of loosen up a little bit, I think that their natural instinct will be to revert back to type. So I still think that there will be loads of opportunities for international travel and expat working.
We touched on redundancy before, and for a lot of people around the world, this has been the reality over the last 12 months. And in my mind, I feel like it's almost the most acceptable time to be made redundant because it is so common at the moment. It's almost removed the stigma around it. The first thing I thought about redundancy before the COVID reality was that it's such a negative thing and such a difficult thing to talk about as an applicant in a job interview. Do you think employers have different views of redundancy than they may have in the past?
Having worked in organizational development for quite some time, it's not unusual for me to have undertaken restructuring initiatives myself. The stigma might exist more in places like the UK. It certainly isn't a massive issue in the Middle East because it's actually probably more commonplace there, I would say, than anywhere else. Because it's grown so fast and a lot of businesses grew exponentially and then had to go back and then sort of re-look at their structures. It's there, it's everywhere at the moment, and I think that we probably have to be more open-minded about people who have been made redundant and try not to have that kind of negative feeling towards what they've got on their CVs. For me personally, I don't ever see it as a negative thing, but I can understand that some people might.
And what do you advise your clients, your job applicants, if they do have a redundancy or termination that they may need to explain in a job interview?
It's all about wording. A termination is obviously quite different, and I think there has to be some aspect of honesty in there. But you have to be very open about the situation, but at the same time explain what you've done since that point in time. And I always say to people, no matter what the situation is, if you're applying for a job that you really want, but you know that perhaps you're not qualified enough, perhaps you have had that career gap or a bit of a blip in your CV, then you must focus on skills. So really think about what you can bring to the table, which isn't about experience, which isn't about qualifications, but what have you done since then to really up your game? So have you done some voluntary work, for example? Have you done some courses online? What have you done to get the skills that you need to be the best that you can be in this position?
Yeah, and I like that you describe it as a blip and then, okay, that was there. Let's move on. What have I done since? What have I done to not necessarily better myself because, redundancy doesn't mean you're bad, but to actively show that you're, upskilling and getting ready for your next role, I guess.
I think that's probably the key thing to take from this. No matter the kind of situation that you find yourself in, and people can be made redundant or can be terminated for so many different reasons that may not necessarily be linked to your performance. I think it's about how you deal with the situation and how you come out of that. really looking at what you can do to bolster your CV whilst you're looking for the next position, that will determine how well you do in the future.
So I'm really interested in being able to provide our expat focused listeners with some practical advice. If we can start with CV writing, for example, obviously every country is very different in what they expect in a CV, but what would you say broadly are some must-dos on a CV and what are some common mistakes that you see?
You just touched on probably one of the key areas, knowing your audience. Knowing the kind of cultural requirements of the country in which you're applying. If, for example, your language in that area isn't quite up to standard, think about what you can do in advance. So if, for example, English is not your first language, and you're going to work in the UK, for example, then think about doing your IELTS examination, because that will stand you in really good stead practically, but also will look fantastic on your CV. But if you're going to the US, for example, then you should look at doing the TOEIC exam instead, just because that's the cultural fit for that country. The same goes with the length of your CV. If you're writing a French CV, for example, for us here, it would be a 1-page document, whereas an English language CV would be a 2-page document. And that is probably one of the biggest mistakes I do see. Absolutely huge CV documents. And we have to remember that we kind of live in a world where people have very short attention spans. They're not used to reading documents, they're more used to graphics and images. So keeping anybody's attention for that length of time is practically impossible these days. When you submit your CV and a human being actually reads your CV, you have 6 seconds in which to captivate your reader. In that time, they need to know absolutely 100% who you are and what you do. And if I can't determine that within the first few seconds, the chances are I'm not going to read the rest of your CV. One of the other big no-nos that I see so often in a CV is that under your work experience section, it's very tempting to list your responsibilities in that job. What to remember is the HR person in the company that you're applying to or the recruitment agent, they do this all the time. So they know what you do in that role and you don't need to tell them again. But what they don't know is why you were amazing at your job. And so this is your chance to show them. So under your work experience, don't list your responsibilities. Do list your key achievements. Why did you excel in that position? What are you most proud of? Did you form part of a project team and you saved lots of money? Things like that are the things that sell you as a person. And one more thing possibly to think about, it's not really a mistake per se, but in your qualifications and training section, try to have something in which is quite recent. If you've got a bit of a gap, it could potentially be a little off-putting for some recruiters because there are so many courses out there nowadays. There's so many things that you can do online. It's really good just to show that you have a commitment in investing in yourself. So there you go. There are some of my top tips for your CV writing.
That's actually a really good point. The education, the ongoing skills demonstration in your CV. I think I'm so used in my CV to listing my university years and the fact that I completed high school, but I've never really thought about, what have I done since? Probably not relevant to list the online hula hooping course that I did during lockdown. But and it's not just online universities now, is it? I mean, are there particular course websites? Like I know there's Coursera, there's Skillshare, there's Udemy. Are there some that look more credible on a CV than others?
I think that it really, really, really depends on the position that you're applying for. One of the things that I tell everybody is that you have to tailor your CV every time you apply for a job. Nowadays, I do quite a lot of CVs for project managers, change managers, that kind of thing. They have great qualifications, but they might not have something super specific to those roles. What we have to remember is that nowadays it's super important to understand that it might not be a human being that reads your CV. It could be what they call an ATS system, which is an automated tracking system. We will feed in the job description into the system, and then I'm going to feed in your CV, and we're going to merge them and see what kind of a match we get. And if it comes back as a sort of 40% match, then you won't go through to the next stage.
I'm guessing this is where keywords really are important.
Exactly.
Okay.
So for the project managers, I am looking for, in the qualifications section, project management courses. The top two for project management, for example, are Prince 2 and PMP. Because they are recognized qualifications, it doesn't really matter who the provider is, as long as you have gained the recognized qualification. To answer your original question, I think that nowadays it's more important that you undertake things which are relevant to the position that you're applying for than necessarily the course provider.
So it's really about the course itself as opposed to who's delivering it for you.
Yeah, and as long as the ATS system can pick out those keywords, because in the job description, 100% they're going to ask for Prince 2 or PMP. So as long as you can match that, you're doing excellently well.
It's a nice little tip for anyone applying for project manager roles.
Just using that as an example. But
Yeah.
having said that, I think that a lot of roles nowadays involve some degree of project management. So it's quite an attractive thing to have on your CV, regardless of the kind of position that you're applying for. Lean Six Sigma is another. And something to do with coaching and mentoring is also something which is quite attractive on a CV these days.
Is Lean Six Sigma the one where you get a black belt or something like
Yes,
that?
yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay. I've heard of this before in the context of someone doing some sort of management training and they're a black belt in something corporate. And I'm like, what?
Yeah. I'm a green belt. I'm a Lean Six Sigma green belt. And
Oh,
I
you're getting
absolutely
there.
love it.
Hang on. Green
Yeah.
is below black, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Didn't want
I
to
have a
insult
long
you.
ways to go to get to black.
I'm really curious because when I was in the UK, I was told when it came to my resume, my CV, that I needed to do a bit of keyword stuffing in terms of putting the keywords in clear white text, like in the footnote of my CV, so that they can't be seen, but they will still be scanned by these systems. Is that something that people still do or should do?
No, I've heard of it also, and I think that the modern ATS systems are very wise to this. They also have a very simple format in terms of what it will read in a CV and what it won't read. I've heard of people doing it in the sort of in the spaces between lines in white so that you can't see it perceptibly, but the system can pick it up. But actually, the system won't pick it up if the format is like that. So, yeah, no, I definitely don't. I definitely don't recommend doing that.
Okay, busting that myth. I won't try that one again. My other question is obviously, if you're applying as an expat, well, you may have international experience already, or you may not, but you want to highlight the qualities you can bring as a foreigner, I guess. How do you best do that in your CV, and where do you do that? Would that be in your personal statement, like at the top of your CV, or leave it for the
Yeah,
cover letter, or?
yeah, I would definitely have a little bit in the personal profile at the top, because I do think it's a very important part. I mean, it creates a part of your personality. It's such a formative thing. So definitely in the personal profile. You also have an area at the bottom of your CV which covers your key skills. ability to speak different languages, cultural awareness, those kind of things can go in there. For me, the cover letter is super important, and actually probably more so in France than anywhere else. The cover letter is an extension of your CV. So this is your chance to verbally communicate what you think you bring to the table. Definitely cultural experience, international awareness is something that you should put in there. But going back to something we spoke about earlier, in terms of career gaps, etc., this is an ideal time to put a little something in there, because a little explanation can go a long way and will stop people from making an automatic judgment based purely on your CV. I had one lady recently who had failed her probation for one reason or another, and she kept saying to me, "Well, I've just been telling people that I was sacked," and I said, "Well, don't say that you were sacked. Quite simply, you didn't pass your probation. You didn't pass your probationary period. Unfortunately, you didn't pass your probationary period during the time of pandemic. It was a difficult time. Unfortunately, I wasn't kept on by the business, and so that's one of the reasons why I'm applying for this position. Just to give you some idea on how you try to word it in a positive manner.
I was really impressed with a friend of mine who started a new role early in the pandemic. And within 6 months, she knew she didn't want to stay. And
Yeah.
when the employer asked her why she was leaving, when recruiters asked her why she left so quickly, she said, you know what? It just wasn't a good fit. We just weren't compatible. It wasn't the right role for me. I found that very impressive as an explanation, because I've always thought, and I'm sure it's a common perception out there, that yeah, something must have gone wrong if you leave a job so quickly. And it looks weird, but it can be the case that it's just not a good fit.
Exactly, and I think it's exactly the right thing to do. I think what job seekers sometimes fail to do is realize that they are also, to a certain extent, in control. So when you go to interview, it's not just about the interviewer speaking to the job seeker and understanding whether or not they're the right fit for the role, but the job seeker also should be interviewing to a certain extent to understand whether or not they really do want to work there. One of the things I do with some of my mentees, especially if they're in a position where they're not currently working, or if they are working but they're looking to make the next step in their careers, is to sit back and really think about the kind of values that you want to have in the company, the next company that you want to work with. And a lot of these values could be around corporate social responsibility, things like mental health initiatives, things that are really in the media at the moment, things that are super important to people.
Gillian, I'm wondering, what are the expectations these days when it comes to moving abroad for a job, and what you should expect your employer to assist you with, and what you should be expected to sort out yourself?
What I've seen in the recent past is that less companies are offering sort of mobilization packages. It used to be commonplace that they would help you with funding towards shipping your furniture, etc., out there. I think it very much varies company to company, and the more corporate the business, the more likely they are to be able to help with your mobilization. The Middle East is particularly good at this, in that you will be offered, as part of your package, as standard, medical health insurance. Quite often, children's education is part of your package. You will be given one annual leave ticket, flight ticket back home per year at least. And those kind of things are as standard, but they might not necessarily nowadays help you to find somewhere to stay when you get there, and they might not necessarily help you to ship your belongings over. I have to say, I think there's still quite an old-fashioned view of companies that if you're not currently in the country, they might not necessarily consider you for a position, which is a shame. So it kind of means that sometimes if you know where you want to work, you kind of have to be in country to approach directly. And I'd like to see that change more over the coming years, but I can't really see it happening if that's my honest truth.
And finally, I just want to touch on interviews. I mean, I think most job interviews over the past 12 months have moved online onto video interviews. Have you seen much of an evolution in the way that interviews are conducted and the way candidates need to project themselves in these interviews? Has it become easier for either party in that regard?
Yes and no. For some people, this kind of thing is a dream come true, but for others, it's equally as nerve-wracking. One of the things that we had started to see even before the pandemic was the rise of the video job description and the video job application.
Was this like the elevator pitch where you have like
Yeah.
2 minutes
Yeah.
to sell yourself in a recorded video or something?
More or less exactly that. You usually have a limit on what you can upload, and it usually is literally maximum 2 minutes.
Oh, what a
So
stress.
it really is your elevator pitch. And this is a big thing. I myself have had to do one, and I actually wrote a blog about it recently because it is such a big thing. The key thing I would say is that in doing it this way, this is all about personality. It's all about showing who you are. So take away the tedious CV writing, the cover letters, all of the hard work that the recruiters have to do. This makes it easy for them. They see you, they see how personable you are, they see all of the things that you're putting across very quickly, and they make a judgment on that. Now, obviously, that has its positives and it has its negatives. At the moment, it usually is accompanied by the CV, etc. So you have all the documentation there, as well as the video diary. But it's definitely making for an interesting experience. But I think that if you get through those stages and you get to interview, I think it's definitely a lot less formal than it ever was before. I have had several meetings online with companies tendering for consultancy work, for example, and I've definitely been less worried about the situation because I'm in the comfort of my own home. But everybody has a preference. Some people, especially recruiters, are finding this kind of difficult.
And Gillian, what's the best way for people to connect with you if they want to discuss further their own strategies towards finding their next opportunity and whether they're going about it the right way?
Well, I'd absolutely love to chat to anybody who's thinking about making a move, who's thinking about, a career change, for example. Could be students who are thinking about what subjects to pick for their futures. And I always say, just get in touch and we'll have a chat. And once we get talking, then, if there's something that I can recommend for you that we can do together, we will. If not, I can recommend lots of other fantastic people who might be able to help. I have a website, c&ehrconsultancy.com. You can also find me on Instagram, or you can just pop me over an email if you like. The three main areas that I kind of work in are France, or Europe more widely, the UK and the UAE. But I also work with some different contacts in places like India, for example. So lots of ideas and lots of recruitment agents that I work with that can potentially help internationally, yes.
That's it for today. If you want to share some expat job search tips of your own, join the conversation in our Facebook groups. You can also contact us via Instagram or Twitter. We are Expat Focus. Don't forget to follow us or subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode, and I'll catch you next time.